Welcome to episode 13 of Nuked Radio. Today is Wednesday, March 28th. With me today is Jules and Stephen Moyer from the Facebook page Radiation Health Solutions, where they cover anything and everything to mitigate damage from radiation and to keep ourselves healthy from a mental, physical, and spiritual perspective. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep, hear you fine. Hi, Jules.
Hi, Christina. How's everybody doing?
Good. You know, we had a couple news stories that we wanted to cover, though, before we get into the interview. We had another pilot freaking out on an airplane yesterday. The first week of the show, this had happened to a stewardess, and coincidentally, these are both JetBlue incidents. And I had mentioned at the time that flying through fallout for the past year is probably going to have some kind of effect on these airline workers. And then I happened to be looking through the news stories yesterday, and I found another passenger that was restrained in Charlotte yesterday for the same thing, freaking out on a flight. I'm going to post a couple links in chat for some background thoughts on this. Enviro reporter Michael Collins had put out a video on a recent flight from Santa Monica to Detroit in December. He recorded, I think, the highest 60 times background radiation in the air. And Miss Milky the Clown recently had used my Geiger for a trip, and flying through the jet stream from Atlanta to San Diego, she was getting 2.85, maybe the highest was 3 microsieverts for the whole trip. And Medcom, who makes the inspector Geiger counter, says that around 28,000 feet, you should be getting 200 CPMs. So those numbers are quite a bit higher. And the links that I'm going to post, one of them is what radiation from depleted uranium did to soldiers in the past. They basically had an incident at Fort Bragg a few years ago where a few of them went crazy and killed their wives, 5 of them actually. And it was determined that all of them had depleted uranium in their system. Also,
yeah, that's bad news.
Yeah. Another passenger, I'll put that link in, from Charlotte. And also a report of what high radiation did to animals around Chernobyl. They began attacking humans and attacking cars. And this was observed in dogs, foxes, wolves, and hogs. And coincidentally, China syndrome was confirmed yesterday in Reactor 2. There was another endoscope that was done. And I have a post. This is from the Irish Examiner that ran the story. Japan's nuclear reactors still have fatally high radiation levels and hardly any water to cool it, according to an internal examination that renews doubts about the plant's stability. A tool equipped with a tiny video camera, a thermometer, and a water gauge was used to assess damage inside the number 2 reactor's containment chamber yesterday for the second time since the tsunami swept into the Fukushima Daiichi plant a year ago. The data showed the damage from the disaster was so severe, the plant operator will have to develop special equipment and technology to tolerate the harsh environment and decommission the plant, a process that's expected to last decades. And TEPCO said today they had planned on being able to decommission the plant in 30 to 40 years, and now based on what they saw in Reactor 2, it's going to be considerably longer. The other 2 reactors that had meltdowns could be in worse shape. The number 2 reactor is the only one officials have been able to closely examine so far. So that's not good news.
No, it's not good news. And they are really in a desperate situation, I think, with what's happening in Tokyo. You know, Arnie Gunderson went to Tokyo. Did you cover that? And he found if that was the United States, we would have to evacuate. That's how much radiation they have.
Yeah. And I also wanted to mention, because I've had a few people email me recently that have been noticing their vegetables are sparking in the microwave. And I was concerned when I read that, of course, knowing that it could be particles. I did find a Canadian Food Inspection Agency report that dense vegetables such as green beans, carrots, and green peppers have higher amounts of minerals than other food items. The minerals act like tiny pieces of metal and can create arcing effects in a microwave. While this doesn't harm you...
I've never seen that, actually. With microwaving vegetables, maybe I should try more often, but I suspect it is radioactive particles if it's sparking.
I noticed that recently when I was smoking a cigar. The cigar was sparking.
Was it sparking?
Yes. And it also says, please note you should never deliberately microwave anything metal unless it is microwave approved. This just reiterates what we've been saying about cleaning your vegetables and fruits. When you get home from the grocery store, make sure that you're washing them in. You can put a tub of water in your sink or a big bowl. Put your fruits and vegetables right in there. Cover it with water. Sprinkle a little baking soda on there. Shake up the bowl so it floats down through. And I let them soak about 20 minutes. Rinse them off, and then I put everything away. And then I don't have to worry if my kids are grabbing food out of the fridge. I know everything's been decontaminated.
Yeah, that's very wise. But I need to point out that the radioactive particles will get into the food as well.
Yeah, the gentleman that we had on yesterday was talking about using calcium and magnesium fertilizers to prevent cesium uptake in plants.
That sounds intelligent.
And I also read in terms of like pine trees, because pine trees are notorious for cesium uptake, that if your pine trees are starting to look bad, if they're getting any red branches, and you suspect if you're in an area that might have high contamination, first of all, you can get your soil tested from Fairwinds. Just write to them. It's Fairwinds. Contact fairwinds.com. Or you can start fertilizing them with a potassium-based fertilizer. And just like we do with our thyroids, eating foods that are higher in potassium to block the iodine uptake, it works the same in trees and plants.
Well, one of the things Lauren Moreau suggested is that you could just take iodine tincture and put it on your body, like near your throat, right, where the thyroid is. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing that, and I think that it actually works because you get a very small amount of iodine through the skin.
Yeah, Jules and I were talking. I had an email from someone in Hawaii the other day that has been using iodine tincture. She suspects that heavy contamination in her area. She said when she first started painting it on, it would last like 2 days, and now it's only lasting 20 minutes.
The only thing you want to be careful of, and I'd like to emphasize this, is if you have thyroid issues, you want to be careful putting the iodine on. I've had thyroid issues on and off for years, and I noticed after I did that, it kicked my thyroid back into hyper mode. So
yeah, well, you have to monitor yourself, and you can go to the doctor and get your level checked. But I did have my level checked, and they told me I had hypothyroidism last year. And my doctor said that it was like an epidemic. And I think we're not getting the reports on how many people have thyroid issues right now, hypo or hyper.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Considering that we're going to be exposed to this for 30 or 40 years at least. For
the rest of our lives.
I certainly don't recommend taking potassium iodide endlessly. First of all, because a lot of people can be allergic to it. I would recommend getting some, though, and having it for emergency purposes in case you're downwind of a plant over here that has a meltdown, or something really bad happens at Fukushima, like the spent fuel pool falling or a hydrovolcanic explosion. It would be good to have it in your medicine cabinet in case of that. We will be back with Nuked Radio in just a moment. And we are back with Nuked Radio. I wanted to give you guys a quick list of the top 10 foods highest in potassium. Dried herbs, like dried coriander, dried parsley, basil, dill, tarragon, turmeric, saffron, and oregano. Avocados, paprika and red chili powder, cocoa powder and dark chocolate, dried apricots, prunes, currants, and raisins, pistachios and other nuts, seeds like pumpkin, squash, sunflower, and flax. Fish is on the list, but you got to be careful with fish, and beans, and dates. So I try to make vegan chili a lot because my kids love that, and I know we're getting a lot of protein. We really don't eat meat at all anymore and haven't for a long time. But I want to talk about this a little more with Stephen because he is the expert. His page covers a lot of different areas. They talk about Geiger counters. They talk about dealing with this from a mental perspective. And he's actually in Vermont and has some memories of the 3 Mile Island incident, which
yes, I do.
Kind of alerted you to what was going on in Fukushima. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, I was about 75 miles downwind from 3 Mile Island when that happened. And I remember driving around in my car and listening to the radio going, should I evacuate? And they were saying on the radio, there's no problem. There was no radiation release. Don't worry. And then later we found out there was a radiation release. In other words, I learned at that point in time, don't trust the government to tell you what's going on. And I determined very early on in the Fukushima episode that the government was not telling us what was going on.
Yeah, you had mentioned that the Obama had confiscated some equipment from universities. I wasn't aware of that.
Well, the high-tech radiation detection equipment that you need to really do a good job of it. The Geiger counters you get, the Inspector Plus or whatever, you're only going to get some of the radiation, not all of it. You're not going to be able to detect all of it with those. And the really good equipment is really expensive. It's like $100,000. And they are at universities, and they were confiscating them. They were like, yeah, we got to take these. They did not want people to know the truth.
And then there was the whole EPA fiasco where they shut down the graphs in early April, saying the levels were
after
decreasing.
They found things.
Right. And I have that original.
They found
list.
things in the milk, and then they go shut down testing. It's like, why? That's exactly the wrong thing to do.
And you and Arnie Gunderson are kind of neighbors.
Well, yeah, we live a few miles apart. I don't actually know where he lives physically, but he's from Burlington, and I live in Shelburne, so we're a few miles apart. I'd like to go see him. I was thinking I might find out where he lives and go knock on his door one day.
Yeah.
I admire him a great deal. He has done a lot of good in this whole situation.
I do too, and we were talking about him off air too, and just saying he has been very conservative and very careful in his estimations of what's going on at Fukushima. His wife is a little bit more outspoken, but his expert status prevents him from talking about some things. And I was actually on the phone with he and his wife a few months back, and I had asked about the EPA graphs, and he had to get off the phone because he couldn't talk about it. But Maggie could.
Well, he has access to information that most people don't have access to because he has contacts inside government and inside the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is happening at Fukushima, I think, is really serious right now. And people have maybe gotten the impression that it's all simmered down and it's pretty well over. It is not over. I guess you've made that point to your audience. Mm-hmm. It is still going on over there. There's still criticalities. There's still nuclear fission happening.
And you wanted to bring up the differences between ionizing radiation and radiation that we get from sources in nature.
There are some myths. There are some myths about radiation that need to be dispelled. And one of them is that you can compare solar radiation with nuclear radiation, like the kind we're getting from Fukushima. And it's not the same kind of thing. Our body has learned how to deal with solar radiation, but we don't know how to deal with plutonium that never existed before. And these other isotopes, the cesium-137 and so forth, we don't know how to deal with these. We don't have any protection against them that's designed for these particular radioisotopes. And we need to understand the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing, and also the difference between internal exposure and external exposure. Mm-hmm. External exposure is when something's outside you, irradiating you. Internal exposure is when it's inside you, irradiating you, and that is so much more dangerous. And that's what Arnie was talking about when he talked about the hot particles that people in Seattle were inhaling. What was it, 10 hot particles a day or something last year?
I've heard between 5 and 30 based on the level of activity outdoors for runners and people who are doing marathons and so forth. It's much higher because they're taking in more air.
Yeah, and Helen Caldecott, another good person for telling the truth, she says if you get a millionth of a gram of plutonium inside you, you're going to get cancer. So, we have they have aerosolized plutonium, uranium, all kinds of junk from that reactor when it blew up. And it went into the upper atmosphere, and it's floating around in the atmosphere, and it's coming down in the rain. It's coming down all the time. And not just in the rain, but particularly in the rain. And people should be told, don't go out in the rain. If you're going to go out in the rain, use an umbrella. And when you get in, don't just put the umbrella with everything else, because you're going to contaminate. If you have something on the umbrella, it's going to go into everything else. It's going to go on the floor, going into the shoes, wherever you put it. So you need to have a whole different way of thinking about it in terms of segregating things that have been exposed to rain, for example, or snow, and the other things. So, we need to have a separation. If you want to be good about it, is say, okay, I'm going to change clothes when I come in the house, and I'm going to put on the non-radioactive clothes, because I think people have been tracking it into their houses. If it's on your shoes and you just walk in your house, you're just walking around with some radiation on your shoes. And I've done it too. So it's kind of like we don't have a comprehension of how to live in this environment. But we're going to have to get it, because it's going to be with us for a very long time.
Well, and it's difficult to comprehend because it's invisible. And so the other clues that you may get is from signs that things may be contaminated, either by what you're noticing outdoors or what you're noticing in your own family. And we had gone over the list of early symptoms like hair loss and nosebleeds and weird bruises and gastroenteritis or stomach upset. And people who have contacted me, a lot of them complain of the stomach problems or their gums bleeding, and they're not, they're using tap water to brush their teeth, and they're using tap water to cook with, and as soon as they make those two simple changes, their symptoms go away.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah, I use reverse osmosis water. What do you use?
The same. I'm buying mine from the grocery store because I don't have a system on my house yet, but I am saving up to get one.
Well, in Burlington, Vermont, we have a food co-op, which is called City Market, and it's very good. They give you free reverse osmosis water if you're a member.
That's wonderful. We'll be back with Stephen Moyer in just a moment. You're listening to Nuked Radio. Welcome back to Nuked Radio. Stephen has a list for us of some foods to incorporate into your diet. And also, we want to talk a little bit about bioaccumulation, because it's kind of a hard concept to explain to people sometimes. But go ahead, Stephen.
Well, this is a list that I got off the internet, and it's a fairly good list. Brown rice, seaweed, kelp, miso. Actually, I love miso. I started doing that, 6 months ago or so. It's a soup that's made out of soy, and it's very good. You can buy it in instant packets, too. I buy it at the co-op, little packages. You just heat up some water, put put the miso package in there, and you have an instant soup. I think that's what really helped the Japanese after Fukushima, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki.
Yes,
They
I heard
have
that too.
miso in their diet. Anyhow, miso soup, pumpkin, spirulina, that's a blue-green algae, bee pollen, wheatgrass, rosemary, beets, of course, all the root vegetables are good, garlic, ginger, there's your another root vegetable, alfalfa sprouts, broccoli, onions, olive oil, leafy greens, all the different mustard greens and so forth, apples, and other sources of pectin. Pectin removes radioactivity from your body, and you can buy pectin too. It's not that expensive. If you go to the part of the supermarket where they sell jellies and jams, pectin is used in making jelly, right?
I think so.
You can buy apple pectin, and you can just mix a little bit up in some orange juice or something every day. Take a little pectin. Also, this is not a food, but I do highly recommend boron. I don't have any evidence that it works, but I took it for a while, and I think it's good. I think it does actually remove radioactivity from your body, because at this point, we have to think about get out of that, because it's already gotten we've eaten it, and we're going to continue to eat it. Even if you wash your vegetables, it's still going to be in the vegetables because it got in the soil. We've really fouled the nest, Christina. And this is really the spiritual dimension of it, in the sense of, well, what have we done? We have said that we're going to be the masters of the universe. We're going to break matter apart and get energy out of it. And in the process of doing so, we've created death. That's what these radioisotopes represent, death. You wanted to talk about cesium and the heart muscle, for example. That's really big, I think, and people don't understand that it's not always cancer that's the problem with radioactivity. When it comes to cesium in the heart muscle, you can have a host of heart problems as a result of having cesium in your heart. Radioactive cesium.
Yeah, Professor Busby has said, he did a wonderful video, the one where he's sitting, I think he's sitting in a restaurant and he has some vegetables. He has like a tomato and a green pepper as a child grows. And even having 1% of heart tissue damage can cause 25% of a decrease in function.
Right.
And, I mean, it is just no fun to grow up as a sick child. You're not going to have the same quality of life. You're not going to be able to do any sports. You're going to tire easily. They might need a heart transplant down the line, depending on the level. And we've got cesium in our milk supply right now. It's been measured recently as December from UC Berkeley, and the numbers were 18,000% higher than what the EPA had tested back in April, right before they shut down the testing.
I wanted to say something about holistic health. Remember, I told you before we started, I wanted to talk about holistic health.
Yeah.
Which means basically that to any health problem you have, there's a physical, mental, and spiritual component. And we've covered the physical mostly. That's what we're talking about with eating these foods and so forth. And the mental is, I think, going to happen soon if it hasn't already. I think people in Japan, for example, are losing their marbles. They're not being able to think straight anymore. And I think these pilots that are going berserk, for example, you mentioned that. I think that's what's one of the mental consequences of radioactivity. But there's a spiritual consequence that's even more insidious and sinister, and that's happening with this idea of, well, I'm old, I don't care, I'll die anyway. It's like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be our brother's keeper. We're supposed to care about each other, right? Mm-hmm. Love your neighbor, all that. The golden rule. Well, we're losing our spirituality through this. If we think, well, it doesn't bother me, I'm 50, I'm not going to be around that long, so don't worry about it. And that's not the right attitude. Or it's like, well, there's not enough radioactivity here to kill me, so I'm not going to worry about it. Well, it will hurt you even if you only get a little bit of it. Even if you only get a small quantity of it, it is going to hurt you. There is no healthy dose of this type of radiation. There's nothing good about it.
Well, and we're getting it from multiple sources. When you're getting, even if the amounts are minuscule, if it's coming at you from food, water, and air, and you may be tracking particles into your house, and we're looking at decades of this going on. And already,
yeah, it's going to go on for the rest of our lives. That's what we have to realize.
Exactly.
Be around.
In any place that you can cut corners or reduce the amount that you're getting is going to help you in the long term. Whether it'll make any difference overall, I don't know.
Well, it'll make a difference. I think we have to work on getting it out of our system because it is already in. We have already inhaled it. We've already eaten it. We've drank water that had it in it. It's okay. It's a little bit, right? A little bit won't hurt you. Well, that's not true. A little bit hurts you a little bit. That's the truth. And a little bit more hurts you a little bit more, and we need to talk about bioaccumulation. It accumulates in your body if you don't do something to get it out. Now, I personally like baking soda baths. Did I tell you that?
No.
I take baking soda baths once a week, once every other week. And I just basically take a cup of baking soda, put it in the bathtub, and sit in it for 20 minutes. You can also add sea salt or Epsom salts if you want. But it's the baking soda that draws out the chemicals, draws out the toxins. It's really good. It feels really good. It feels like, wow, that felt really good. So there's different ways of getting the radioactivity out of your body. The boron, I think, binds with it. This is my theory. And I think it brings it out. And I think the baking soda brings it out through your skin when you take a baking soda bath. And I think washing your vegetables, that's also a very good idea with the baking soda. And there are other things that will do it, too. We discussed it in the group. There's something called Prussian blue, which they've known about for a long time. It's a dye. I don't even know where you get it, but Prussian blue will take radioactivity out of your system. And the government has come up with chemicals that will do it as well. So there's a lot out there in terms of information, but our government is not telling us. And that's a basic problem. Why is our government not concerned with our health? Why aren't they giving us the data? This is a political issue, Christina. And I tell people, don't vote for politicians who support nuclear power. We have to stop supporting them. They're the ones that are voting for nuclear power. We have to stop voting for them.
You had a gentleman that you had mentioned to me in an email a few weeks back who is involved politically and maybe bringing this up as an issue, too. I don't recall his name.
Who was that? I do remember something about that.
I'll look through my emails and find it. But you had mentioned, too, the cost of nuclear power. A lot of people don't know. I mean, all the nuke plants do is boil water, and then they generate a huge amount of plutonium, 500 pounds per reactor per year, that gets collected by the government because they subsidize the plants. And it gets shipped off to Los Alamos and these other labs where it's put into weapons that we go.
It's part of the weapons industry. I think that the nuclear power industry came out of the weapons industry. That's the truth. And it's used to, like you say, produce plutonium. And we really ought not have it anywhere in the world. I want a nuclear-free world, don't you? So, this is going to be political. At some point, the solutions are going to have to be political. Beyond the sea, we have to get political.
All right, we'll be back with Stephen Moyer in just a moment. You're listening to Nuked Radio.
And watches the ships that go sailing somewhere.
And we are back with Nuked Radio, and one of the reasons we started this program was to inform people of all the different ways that they're getting nuked. And it's not just Fukushima, but there are many other ways that we are exposed. And one issue that Stephen is pretty passionate about is depleted uranium. And so I wanted to have him talk about that for a little bit.
Well, these are weapons that should be banned, flat out banned. They are horrible weapons against innocent people. Because what happens when a depleted uranium shell hits a tank, for example, is the uranium is aerosolized and put into the environment. The tank explodes, but the uranium that was in there, which is basically nuclear waste, it's processed nuclear waste, right?
Mm-hmm.
That turned into aerosolized dust. And they find it on the other side of the world from Fallujah or wherever these weapons have been used. But the people in Fallujah are having terrible birth defects. The question in Fallujah, when a mother has a baby, the first question she asks the doctor is it normal? Because they have so many mutants, so many abnormal children there. And it's from this aerosolized uranium dust that comes from nuclear power plants, I believe, or else nuclear weapons. They deplete the activity of the uranium, but it's still there, and it's still dangerous enough to cause mutations. And this is something we haven't talked about, Christina, but it isn't necessarily that you have to worry about just your heart muscle or your lungs or anything in your body. But if the radioactivity gets into your body and gets to your sperm or your eggs, your germ cells, you will be mutating your genome. And even if if your children are not mutants, they will have deformed genes, which they will pass on to their children. And maybe it will take 2 or 3 generations for a latent gene to express itself. This is really hard to understand. It's like this stuff doesn't stop. It keeps generating problems into the future. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and the birth defects, the congenital anomalies that are coming out of Fallujah are absolutely horrendous.
I sent you a link, remember what it was? It was depleted uranium birth defects.images.nodes.org, and you can put an underline between the words depleted uranium birth defects, underline between each of the words, and then you have a URL. This is my search technology I invented. Depleted uranium birth defects with underlines between the words .images.nodes.org. And that will take you to Google Images and search for the babies that have been born in Fallujah and other places because of the depleted uranium weapons. It's horrible. I mean, this is going to be hard to see if you do this search. You're going to say, oh, I didn't want to see that.
Yeah, it is.
It's part of what happens with radioactivity. This is what we are doing to ourselves. And not just ourselves, to other forms of life as well.
Well, and our soldiers are coming back from these places, and they're having children with birth defects as well.
And lots of health problems for themselves, too.
Mm-hmm.
Gulf War illness is probably largely related to depleted uranium weapons. And the government doesn't recognize it. They don't acknowledge the fact. So there's a huge conspiracy going on. These are war crimes, Christina, to use weapons of this nature. It's against various conventions because you're attacking innocent civilians when you put things into the atmosphere and into the water and into the soil.
Well, speaking of the atmosphere, we have a question from Shane in chat for you. He was wondering if you thought the chemtrails have a component of barium, which is to absorb some of the radiation. Or
that's a very interesting question. I don't know is the answer. I have not studied chemtrails very much at all. I've heard things about them. What do you know about them?
I don't know much. I've seen different studies that lead me to believe that they are being used to reflect some of the gamma rays coming from the sun with the increased sun activity and the holes that we have in our magnetosphere, in our ionosphere, and in our ozone layer. But I think that they have also been used as testing, where they've maybe incorporated different materials and tested them on populations. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's being done. And I know there is an excellent video on YouTube called What in the World Are They Spraying?
Yes, I've seen that.
And anyone who wants more information, that's a good video to start with. Jules, can you answer the chemtrail question?
No, I mean, as far as the chemtrails, there's a whole bunch of different theories as to what they're using them for, but I had read the same thing about potentially to deflect some of the gamma rays from the elevated sun activity. But, I don't know. I find it hard to believe that they would be doing anything that would be to our benefit, to be honest. I mean, I think that the chemtrails are definitely something more nefarious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know I get asked about it almost every show that I go on to talk about Fukushima. There's always someone that has chemtrail questions. So, I mean, it's definitely getting more mainstream or noticed.
I don't know what they're doing. It could be they're putting radioactivity into the environment. It's possible, but I don't know that. And I took an approach early on with this Fukushima crisis that I was not going to find out good information because it was being suppressed. And that turned out to be the case, and it's still being suppressed. And so I said, well, what can I do? Well, I can at least find out how we can deal with it in our bodies and find solutions for getting it out of our bodies. That much we can do. We can find what works. And there are a lot of things. I encourage people to go to the group, which, by the way, is rhs.nodes.org. RHS stands for Radiation Health Solutions, and that's the name of the group. rhs.nodes.org. That's my meta link, which will take you to the Facebook group. You're welcome to join. There's a lot of information there. There's also a lot of information at my website, stevemoyer.us/radhealth. Rad Health stands for Radiation Health. So stevemoyer.us/radhealth and rhs.nodes.org are two good places to go for more information.
Stephen, something that's really bothered me is after Reactor 3 exploded, now knowing the amount of contamination, especially in the Pacific Northwest, we probably should have sheltered indoors for a period of time, and everyone should have been on potassium iodide and made aware of the seriousness of that event. But in the event that something worse happens, have you made plans to relocate or evacuate, even though you're all the way in Vermont?
Well, I've thought about it. Put it that way. I really would not want to advertise what my plans are in any specific way. I don't think that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good idea to have a bug out location. That's the technical term, if you will. A place where you're going to go. There was a good place to go in the event of, a bad thing happening. And it was a town in Montana. And that town was destroyed by that when he did that, because everybody said, "Oh, we're going to go there." It's like, no, that ruins it when everybody goes there.
I do.
So you got to do your own research.
Yeah, plan.
Gerald say south is better than north. Go south.
Definitely, and to have a shelter-in plan.
Yes, it is.
Because there's a lot of people that, because they have children or they might have, their parents live with them, they're not going to be mobile. And they may just prefer to stay. I know that Arnie Gunderson has told his friends, if they live in the Pacific Northwest, that they need to get on a plane and get out if the spent fuel pool falls.
Oh, yeah. And that is likely to fall, in my opinion. It is just a matter of time.
So we kind of have to be prepared for all these different scenarios, and it's just the reality of this situation. And I really
the world we live in.
A lot of the reason why the government, in addition to because of their political ties to the nuke industry and the fact that these nuclear reactors are basically bomb-making plants, also to admit how bad the problem is would require the government to do something about it. And the levels of contamination, the early reports from the USGS, especially in the LA area and the Portland area, were very high. And there may be an opportunity for an industry to do decontamination work at some point.
Jules is back.
Jules is back. She was off for a minute.
Yes, I am.
And just in time, because we're out of time.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on today. Please check out Stephen's website, Radiation Health Solutions.
rhs.nodes.org.
And we'll be back tomorrow. And don't forget, Friday is Fuku Venting Day, where you can call in and tell us how you feel about this situation. So we'll be back tomorrow. Thanks again, Stephen.
You're welcome. Take care.